This is the TJ Hoisington Podcast. Unleash your greatness within.
You say in the book, and this is a question I wrote, do you think people are too in their heads thinking and not enough feeling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something that I stress a lot in the book. And I think anyone who buys a book like this is probably quite an intellectualizer. Or engages with my content or any of this, like they want to understand, they have this hungry mind, they want to make connections, they want reasons, but often if we just do that, it's actually a way of avoiding pain by just thinking.
Hey there, and welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. In today's episode, listen, it was my pleasure to interview Dr. Annie Zimmerman.
Passion and my mission to help you unleash your greatness within. My heart goes out to the underdogs that's on their way. If you think you can go from good to great, okay, let's motivate. GreatnessWithin.com. TJ Hoisington. GreatnessWithin.com. Oh, if you dreaming it, believing it, work hard for it, and in the process serve others in a positive way.
You see, Annie is the author of the new book titled Your Pocket Therapist. And let me tell you something, this interview is amazing as we talk about life, we talk about mental health, we talk about relationships, and on and on and on. All kinds of nuggets throughout this whole interview. So you're going to want to check it out and listen to it from beginning to end. But you see, Annie is a psychotherapist. This is her first book, Your Pocket Therapist, and it's a great, simple book with simple concepts that really reach deep. And we just get into that in this conversation. She has hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, hundreds of thousands of followers on TikTok. And you know what? It's obvious that her message is resonating. And so it was my pleasure to have her on the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast, along with many other high achievers that I bring on to the show that can help drip insights and ideas that can help you improve your life, improve your happiness, give you insights that can just help you thrive. Now, if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, hey, I invite you to subscribe and make sure you click that notification bell so that you're notified every time I come out with a new success interview like this one. And if you're watching this on Rumble, thank you for following me over there. And then of course, if you've downloaded the podcast from iTunes or Google Play or iHeartRadio or Spotify, thank you for being a part of my community. I really appreciate it. All right, now, without any further ado, let's jump right into this interview. Annie, welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm totally excited that you're on the show. I've known that you were going to come on the show for the last couple months. I've read your book, Your Pocket Therapist. So excited to dive into it, but really dive into principles that can change people's lives, because that's what your book is all about. These nuggets, these insights. And so, hey, let's jump into some of those ideas and how you can lift people and help people. But before we do that, could you share with our audience a little bit of your backstory?
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess, in the first chapter of the book, I really outline my own experiences with therapy and just how transformational they were. That I started off with struggles with binge eating and anxiety and problems in relationships. And actually, even though I come from a family of therapists, like every woman in my family is a therapist. My mom, my sister.
Yeah, you said your mom, your grandma, your sisters or something, yeah?
Yeah, it's like, so you would think that I'd known it all, but therapy is something you kind of have to go through rather than just knowing about. I think it's such a process. And so I was really struggling in my life, and therapy just completely has changed my life. And I feel so much more grounded and so much more self-aware. And I just wanted to bring not only practice as a therapist, but also just bring some of the insights, some of the tools that I was learning in therapy to the mainstream. I think that Insta therapy is such a source of knowledge for people, but there's so much misinformation, and there's
Yes.
a lot of, I would say, superficiality. It's a lot of positive thinking, and there's not a lot of nuance. And what I really wanted to do is bring the nuance that I was seeing in the therapy room, both my own personal therapy and with my clients, and I was learning about, and create a space online where there's still that depth, there's still that complexity, but it's delivered in a way that people can really resonate and that it's simple to understand. So that's the kind of idea behind Your Pocket Therapist, that it's like pockety and bite-sized, but without losing the depth that people are really hungry for as they start to educate themselves about psychology.
Love it. It's obviously resonating, right? Because you have hundreds of thousands of followers, millions of views. People are resonating to these pocket-sized insights, if you will. And so we're going to dive into that in this interview. All right. So just a question, as you were talking about how everybody in your family, all the females in your family are all therapists. Did you, maybe it's a little personal, so you don't have to answer it, but you bring it up later in the book, this part where you talk about maybe you feel like you came from the perfect family or a great family or a great upbringing. So my question for you is, did you feel like you came from a good family and a good upbringing?
I guess you could interpret everyone being a therapist in two ways. Either everyone's sorted or everyone's messed up.
Right.
I think we're somewhere in the middle. Yeah, I mean, I certainly am very close with my family, and feel really grateful to have their support. But we've all individually gone through a therapeutic process, and that has come from a place where healing has been needed. But I think it's amazing when multiple people in a family are in therapy, because the growing really takes place together.
Are you guys all pretty open in your communication of the research and insights that you each learn and how it interrelates and so forth?
Yeah, our family meetings, our family like conversations are sometimes like supervision. I've read this paper and I'm learning this, and like we're all really like stimulated by it. So it's a nice place to be. Yeah.
Well,
And
I would love to be at your family's gathering at some
are
point.
you sure?
Oh, I would eat that up. Wow, that's awesome. So, okay, so your pocket therapist, you open the book, and the first thing that stood out to me was in the preface. The first line of the book, it says, let me quote it exactly, it says, all patient stories are fiction. Okay, that alone is worth an explanation. How would you talk about that?
That I take confidentiality really seriously, and I didn't want to put anything real in the book. That doesn't mean that the emotions and the characters and the stories aren't coming from a collection of parts of myself, parts of things that I've learned. But I didn't want to take anyone else's story and write about it. So
Of course, for sure. That makes sense. But that is not what I interpreted when I read it. I thought what I read, and I'm curious from a standpoint of your research and so forth. When I read that line, I thought of everyone's stories are fictional. From the perspective that I had was through our own interpretation of our world events and circumstances. So two people can have the same event and have totally different experiences. Therefore, the stories we've kind of told ourselves and the belief systems we've set our life up on, maybe to some degree, they're a little bit fictional. I mean, can you see any truth in any of that?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. It reminds me of, I had a philosophy class and it was talking about truth and what truth means. And I'm going to butcher it, but there were like three types of truth. There's like the truth of what you believe happened, which is fiction, which is your truth. Another truth. And then there's the truth of what actually happened, that is the real truth. Like a thing did happen and it happened a certain way, but because it's in the past, it's become only fiction because we can only recreate it in our memory. So yeah, it's really interesting you took it that way.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting. All right. So you say in modern Western culture, we tend to believe that our conscious mind is in the driving seat. In reality, however, it's our unconscious mind that runs the show. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, this is this is like the root of psychoanalytic theory, like psychoanalysis, is that we have an unconscious, and it's our unconscious that is determining our behavior, that's determining our reactions to things, how we feel. And the work of healing, the work of change, is to become more aware of what we're unconscious of so that we can release its power over us. And it feels really important to me to put this in like a pop psychology book, because so many self-help books are operating only on the conscious mind. It's like, change your behaviors, do new habits, change the way you talk to yourself. But that's impossible if your unconscious is holding you back or sabotaging you or afraid of something. Like, to really change, you have to understand what you're not already aware of and work with your unconscious, which is what we do in therapy.
No, love it. I remember years ago reading a book called by Joseph Murphy. It was a book written in the 1950s or 60s called The Power of the Subconscious Mind. So first question is, when you use the word unconscious, is that the same as subconscious? Would you Okay. Just so we're clear there. So in that book, he says, imagine that you're on a ship and the captain of the ship at the wheel of the ship is the conscious mind. And then imagine the engine down below is what drives the ship forward. He says the captain determines the direction of the ship, but the real power and thrust comes from the engine. And he says, so if the captain decided to turn the ship into the rocks, the question is, he would ask in the book, will the engine follow the captain's orders or the conscious mind's orders? And the answer is yes. And so when you talk about what's really driving us, it's deep-seated. You talk in the book about the iceberg. 10% is above the surface level, and then you talk about how 90% of all that's going on has got, you even say in the book, it's got to be talked out, it's got to be felt, we've got to connect back to some of those pieces of us. And then you get into one of the hot points throughout the whole book is the principle of curiosity. Could you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, it came from something that my therapist says to me a lot, of like, when you do something and you're like, why did I do that? Or why did I react in a certain way? Or why am I so stuck? And you start hating on yourself. You're actually not getting anywhere. It's really counterintuitive. You're not growing. You're just hating on yourself. Whereas I guess a good therapist comes in with curiosity and is like, okay, let's not judge. Let's just be curious. Like, what was going on there? Why did that happen? What happened before that? What are the things that led up to it? What from your past might have been triggered that you were really responding to? And approaching yourself and anything that you're trying to understand yourself better on with curiosity just kind of shuts down that critical voice and enables us to, really become aware of what is going on in the engine room. Maybe there's a fight going on down there that we're not aware of, or maybe the iceberg is like melting, and I think that we can't actually grow unless we're curious about ourselves without judgment. I
agreed. And I think that even relates to parenting. I don't know why my mind is going there right now, but when my kids make a bad decision or a bad choice or whatever, I may in the moment question it, like, why did you make that choice? Why didn't you think about these consequences or whatever? But what I really want to get to as a parent is why. And so I try to over the years, slow my kids down and really go, what were you thinking? How did that relate to this and this and this? How did it go? And oftentimes I'm aha'd because I didn't see the train of truth that led them to that point. And actually, sometimes it made sense.
Right. Yeah. And I think that if we can link our behaviors and our feelings back to our unconscious, it almost always does make sense. There's always a reason. We just aren't aware of the reason. And if you're not aware of the reason, like, how can you change, right?
Totally. Talking about limiting beliefs, I often say, and maybe you can correct me here, but I've often taught that we all have beliefs, but what trips us up oftentimes, and maybe to follow this train of thought for 2 seconds, is what trips us up sometimes isn't the primary belief maybe, but it's the secondary belief, or in other words, the rule. Like, two people can believe that spirituality is important, but those same two people may have some rules that are set up that what spirituality means equals two different things, or eating healthy means two different things, or being organized means two or more different things, right? So understanding what our beliefs are, understanding our rules that we've set up over the years that cause us to use certain, I call them vehicles, to satisfy the need or the rule, is really important to kind of uncover and wonder a little bit, curiosity, wonder, why am I doing that? What's the deep-seated reason why I'm doing this or that? Any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, exactly. I think, and so often our self-beliefs and then the rules we build up around them come from something we're told or something we're taught as children. And we don't even remember it, we don't realize it, but it becomes like core to who we are and how we act. And we can live our lives so blindly with just these like cemented beliefs and cemented rules, as you say, that are actually not serving us anymore and are actually inhibiting us from where we want to be.
Love it. Love it. And I think that's true. You come up with 5 key steps, and these are, I believe these are your processes. So I'm just going to run through them real quick. You say in the book, your pocket therapist. All right. You say, number 1, get curious, recognize what the problem is, that it's signposting a deeper issue underneath. Now I'm cutting through these just to keep it simple. Number 2, understand, go deep into your past experience, becoming more aware of the root of what the root of the problem might be and why it's there. Number 3, experience the emotions that are being kept down. We are all very talented at avoiding things we don't want to face. Number 4, act. Turn this new awareness into action and make different choices. And then number 5, repeat. Notice when these patterns reoccur, go through these steps, then notice when it inevitably comes up again, and then you put in parentheses, and again, and again, and again, and again. So, feeling, you say in the book, and this is a question I wrote, do you think people are too in their heads thinking and not enough feeling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something that I stress a lot in the book. And I think anyone who buys a book like this is probably quite an intellectualizer. Or engages with my content or any of this, like they want to understand, they have this hungry mind, they want to make connections, they want reasons. But often if we just do that, it's actually a way of avoiding pain by just thinking. And I think it's just so essential to understand and to ask those questions why, but to also not just stay in our heads with that. So sometimes it's just about letting yourself cry, letting yourself connect to the past, because you can think about the past and understand how it's impacted you without actually processing it. It's really about going back to the things that have happened to you and really feeling the effects of them, how it felt when you were younger, how, what was missing, what you did have, even the positive feelings. And that's really like the work of therapy, is to properly process those things rather than just, otherwise therapy would just be one session. You'd say, oh, it's all your mum's fault. The reason you do this is because this happened to you as a child. Goodbye. But, you can know that. And then there's like knowing that in your soul and knowing that in your heart. And that's a very different thing. And often that's the difficult thing, is to go into that pain.
And so would you say in therapy that as you take people to that more unconscious side, you dive in a little bit deeper to find the why and the reasons and what truths were involved and so forth, thought processes, beliefs, everything, right? Mm-hmm. You're not trying to take those events away. What you're trying to do is change the interpretation of those events. Is that fair? Yeah,
definitely. Because I think we can form these beliefs that are really like unflexible, that it's like they're etched in stone, and actually you can go back and think and reconnect with different parts and feelings and change your experience of them, and that enables you to have a different experience. Exactly. But I will say about those 5 steps is that like therapy is not neat. and it can't really be condensed into 5 steps, but these are 5 like core elements of therapy. But everyone will be different. Some people might stay in just curious for like 3 years. Other people might go straight into the feeling and actually have to do more thinking and understanding. For other people, it's they do it all and then they can't actually turn it into action and change, and then they have to keep going back and round, and it's super messy. There's no kind of 5-step cure, but these 5 elements are essential, I think, for any change to happen.
Yeah, for sure. We are not trying to simplify this into a simple podcast, for sure. But I thought, just generally speaking, those 5 steps were really, really great steps for simplifying. But like you said, you could be in one step for 5 years or 3 years or whatever. So love it. I often tell my kids, I'm curious from your perspective, so I'm divulging here, that all emotional pain that you feel. So correct me if I'm wrong. I want you to correct me. I'm okay with correction. All emotional pain that you are feeling is, I think, caused because of beliefs or expectations that are not being met. Is there some truth in that, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about all emotional pain.
All, never, ever, right? Those are extreme words. I get it. Right. Yeah.
But absolutely, I think the frustration of having a need and having something you want not be met or taken away from you can cause like deep pain. I guess that's like anger and injustice. That feeling of not getting what you want is certainly connected to not having your needs met. But sometimes stuff just hurts because it hurts, right? Like loss and grief and but I guess actually when I think about that, loss and grief are really not having something that you want. You have to reckon with not having what you want. So maybe there's truth in what you're saying.
Well, I'm just thinking, even if with loss, right? That's a belief. That's an expectation.
You have to readjust to.
And we all, as human beings, we all kind of see the world and work through the world in our own unique way. And I could see how, obviously working with people, I do a lot of executive coaching, and sometimes I feel like, in a way, although technically I'm not licensed like you are to do it, is I'm counseling people, and they'll open up to me because I try to be, and I feel like you're the same way. We try to be personable, non-judgmental. Let me hear you. Let's analyze it. Let's talk about it. But I have this one person in the past that I've had a conversation with, and I wrote on my notes, she tends to be envy and jealous of what she sees on social media. And so as we were talking, I'm going back to my memory a little bit, but as we were talking, it was just about how she's maybe after work or before work or whatever, she's always looking at other people's worlds and never really accepting her own. And so there's a couple thoughts that go through my head. Do sometimes we as human beings expect our worlds to be perfect, like there's a perfect path, when maybe we should lessen our rules or lessen the rigidity? You used the word earlier, rigid, right? But people, I even looked on one of your TikTok videos, the comments, people have a hard time accepting compliments. People have in the comment section, people have a hard time accepting gifts. They judge based on what they see in media and so forth. And so this person decided that for 4 weeks, they were going to put away their social media and try to purge it a little bit out of their lives to bring some balance back to their life. I don't know. Any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess envy in a way is a useful feeling. Like it shows us what we want. If somebody else, is off on holiday and we feel envy, maybe that's because we need a break, and it kind of shines a light on something that we don't have that we want. So I think we can then judge ourselves and think, oh, I'm always comparing myself to others and I'm so terrible and da da da. But actually, it's showing us something that we desire and that we can work towards getting ourselves. So I think, again, if we approach with curiosity and reflect rather than judgment, we can use envy to help us understand ourselves. However, the way we live online, we're only showing, and it's, we've said this before, but like, we're only showing our best selves. Our shadows are not there. Although I do think that's changing to some extent, but largely it's like a completely filtered version of our lives, which means that we get a really skewed idea of how other people are living, and really the dark thoughts, the shadows thoughts that are happening for everyone, the bad days, we don't see that at all. And that means that we can create this false illusion that other people are all happy and we're the only ones suffering. But to be human is to suffer, and it's also to have joy. But it's important for everyone to realize that even the people who have got the most glamorous social media lives, they're also suffering.
Oh, I love that. To me, that is truth. Okay, truth. I think it's practical. That's what I love about you. When I was reading your book, I was like, she's so practical. Don't blame your parents. But then also you just mentioned, and you said that several times, right? They did the best they could. So give them a little bit of a break.
But they still impacted you. And like, you can still reflect on how your childhood impacted you without blaming them all of the time and everything being their fault.
That's good. So your parents have impacted you, but you don't have to blame them all the time, right? We can move. Are you suggesting people move past that, or just come to a point where they understand, hey, my parents did the best they could given the circumstances? I mean, what does that typically look like?
I think that's like, people really struggle to talk negatively about their parents in therapy, because they feel that like they're not being grateful, or that they're guilty, and that they should always, be super complimentary and grateful as to how their parents were with them. But again, that's a judgment, and it stops us from really connecting to the truth, which is that our parents, everyone's parents, is flawed, and even the most perfect parent in the world will have flaws that would have impacted the child. And I think it's just so much better to free ourselves from blame or guilt or shame, and just really neutrally almost reflect on like how our childhood was and how that impacted us, without saying my mum was awful, my dad was awful, or my mum was amazing and my dad was amazing. Like, no value judgment, but how did it impact me? What were the feelings that were happening, and how is it still showing up today?
Love it. That makes me think of authenticity. Later in the book, I'm jumping ahead in my notes, but you talk about authenticity. Last week, I interviewed someone. That podcast hasn't landed yet, but there was this one little section on that podcast, and you were talking loud about it in your book, just about authenticity. And this other guest said, aspirational is out and authentic is in. You don't have to be perfect, just authentic. And you were just saying with social media, how we see the best of people's lives, but we don't often see the shadows. And what he was saying in that interview, and I felt that kind of come up in your book, hey, accept that we have faults, accept that we have weaknesses, embrace it all, and be like, I can improve if I want to improve it, but it doesn't have to define me at the same time. And we can be honest about it. Any thoughts about authenticity?
Yeah, exactly. I guess the things that go in our unconscious that we repress are the things that we can't accept in ourselves. So therapy is about feeling more whole by bringing in all the things we're ashamed of, and bringing in all those parts that we think other people would judge us for or reject us for. And to say, like, I am a flawed person, I'm a vulnerable person. Sometimes I can get really angry. Sometimes I have envy. Sometimes I have, all these dark thoughts. Plus I have all these good qualities. And it's about like embracing that wholeness. And I think the reason why therapy is so essential and moving is because you're showing, maybe for the first time for most people, your shadow to somebody else. You're showing your authentic self to somebody else, and they stay and they're like, yes, show me more, I'm interested in you. And that is the most powerful message, because you're being told, I want you for your authentic self. I don't want the false, I don't want the facade, I don't want just the highlights. I want to also see your shadow, and also see the parts that you've previously been ashamed of. And when you have that experience in therapy, you can then go into the world and be vulnerable with people and be accepted. And that's such a powerful message.
In your family life, I'm speaking generally, hypothetically, in the audience, think about your family. They often see the shadows. They often see the positive and the negative. They know the things that are kind of weak, or the times you have outbursts, or the time, whatever the issue is. I've I've tried as I've raised my kids to be as authentic and vulnerable as I can, which means just the other day, I have two sons that are already married, have children, so forth. I have a couple grandkids. Just the other day, I was talking to one of them. I said, at some point, I want to sit down. I was reading your book and I was thinking, sometime I want to sit down. I know we've done this as kids when you guys were younger, but you know what? At some point, I want to sit down with you and just let's go over your life history with me and let me know what I did that still stings you today, if there is anything. And of course, my son was like, Dad, there's not really anything I can think of. And I said, no, but I wonder, I want to do that with each of my kids and be totally authentic as a parent. And this started when my oldest son, who's now 25, was 12 years old, and I would just take every quarter, I would take him into our bedroom and just say, hey, let's have a father and son. It could be a daughter and dad, daughter and mom. It doesn't matter. Let's just have a conversation. And the rule about this conversation was no matter what was going on in the world, I had to be a total listener. There had to be no judgment. I had to just allow him to express whatever was on his mind. And even if I wanted to correct him in that 20-minute time period, I couldn't be the parent. I couldn't correct him. I just had to listen and empathize.
How was that for you?
What's that? Say that again.
What was that like for you? That must have been like amazing and also challenging.
You know what? I'm an open communicator, so maybe it's easy for me if I'm being totally honest with everybody. I want to feel what you're feeling. Annie, I want to feel what you're feeling when you're talking. Let's just have an open conversation. And so with my kids, I was always like, because as a parent, there's moments of discipline, but I always hope to show a lot of love too. So it's a balance between this love and enforcement. And my hope is that my love always is a few percentages higher than the enforcement, because I always tell my kids, I don't care what you do that's bad or whatever, that will never take away my love for you. But that day at 12 years old, at the end of that conversation, I said, and I've shared this before on the podcast, so for some of you, I apologize, but I said, I was kneeling at the front of my bed. He was on the back of the bed with his back against the headboard. And he was just sitting there. We had talked. That conversation, he was talking about a girl at 12 years old that didn't like him anymore. So he was crying and it was all emotional and so forth. But at the very end, we got through that. And then I just had this thought, this impression, this feeling go through me to ask Bryce, how can I be a better dad? And I was kneeling down at the front of the bed. And I said, Bryce, I got a tough question for you. And I want you to be I'm giving you permission to be totally honest. You cannot hurt my feelings. I want to know, how can I be a better dad? And I remember he was sitting on the back, 12 years old, sitting with his head his back against the headboard. And he said, what are you talking about, Dad? You're the best dad ever. And I said, I know. No, I didn't really. I said, no. I said, son, tell me what. And I remember he paused for a minute and I could see that he took a breath because, right, he doesn't want to defame his parents. He loves his parents, but I'm trying to coax that out of him. And he says, Dad, it just seems like lately you've been really snappy with everybody. I paused. I said, Bryce, you're right. I said, you're right. And you know what? I'll work on that. Maybe my stress has gotten a little bit beyond too much on my plate kind of a thing, that I'm now reacting to things when I shouldn't be reacting to simple things. And you know what? I made it a focus to improve. But what I hope in the long run, as we've done this throughout the years with all of our kids, that they know they can go to us and others and communicate without the feeling of embarrassment, without the feeling of being judged, without the feeling of being rejected. No, we want to hear. And now in my corporate world, I tell leaders to do the same thing. Next time you're in a one-on-one with your team members, why can't you say, hey, how can I be a better leader? How can I communicate better for you that would work better for you when I communicate with you? How can I be better? I can tell you what, if you ask the 7 people on your team, what happens if they all say the same thing? Well, my hope is that you're humble and coachable enough that you'll go work on that one thing.
But where did you learn to be so receptive to feedback and wanting to grow? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who would really struggle to hear their kids say that and be really defensive, and it would be an argument, and it would, where did you learn to be so open
Okay. Wow, nobody's ever asked me that. Okay, now you're doing therapy on me. Here we go. No. I think it's partly my upbringing. I feel like I came from a real rich family in terms of love. My dad always heard me. He believed in me. In 1986, our little family of 8 kids, we were all flown to the White House during the Reagan administration and kind of highlighted as the greatest American family. Nobody knows that, but maybe I'll show a picture here in the video version of this podcast. So I came from what I felt like was a perfect family. Then when I was 15, I started to listen to personal development tapes. One tape that stood out to me was Hiram Smith of Franklin Covey organization. He's since passed away. And he would say, even strong men cry. And I remember as a young 15, 16-year-old listening to my old, if you remember what Walkmans are, right? I had that old Walkman with a cassette tape in it, and I would listen to all kinds of tapes, and I learned to be real. I learned to be authentic. I learned that there's so much judgment in this world. Listen, you've got to have some grace on yourself. And I think as I was listening to all this material, studying books like Your Pocket Therapist, right? Other books similar in that world and so forth. I just learned it's better to be open. And what I didn't want when I was older was regret, or the stories I would read in books, like some of the stories in your book, like Charlie or Yaz, and people got to get in your book and read it. I thought, if these are the stories I'm reading in books, I want to get ahead of that and just be real from the get-go, right? Because then we all win. That's sort of my thought. So I came from a family that was pretty open and loving, even though financially we were not very well-to-do. And then from that, I went into personal development. It taught me how to think higher and be more understanding and realize that everybody's interpretation of the world is a little bit differently. So you really need to hear them. And really, I've learned that people just want to be heard, right? So
it's
anyway.
so important. I think some people don't even realize that they're not being authentic. And Winnicott, one of my favorite psychoanalysts I talk about in the book, has this theory of true self and false self. And it's like our messy, vulnerable shadow self, and then our false self, which is like the persona that we give to the world, who's always happy and always positive. It's not really real. And I think some people have been so in their false self for so long that they don't even realize that their true self is hidden. They don't even realize it's a persona. And I think it takes like a real awakening to realize, oh my gosh, like I haven't even been being real with myself,
For sure. The one thing I've probably never told publicly is growing up with this family that was what I thought was amazing. My parents are amazing. But 20 years ago, after 36 years of marriage, my dad left the family. I was about 32 at the time. 34. It shattered me. It hurt. The benefit that I had, and I didn't go to therapy or anything, but it took about a year and a half for me to remember my values, remember the good that I was taught growing up, to not just throw the baby out with the bathwater. And fortunately, if this makes sense, correct me if there's another way of looking at it, but I had a family, I was married, I already had a couple kids when all this happened. So I felt like I had a reality that I was creating. Whereas I feel horrible for these people listening to this right now that didn't grow up in that kind of family, and they had to suffer those sufferings when they were 2, 5, 7, 11, 12, 14. But I will say this, the last thing I'll say on this, because I feel like I'm talking a lot, and I don't mean to do that, because you are why you're on, this is why we're having the show, is because of you. I used to think when people would say, life isn't fair, I would always say, you know what? That's really negative. Why would you say that? Right? Be optimistic. And then when my dad left, for the first time in my life at 34 years old, I realized at a very visceral, emotional level that life isn't always fair. Right? And so now, granted, I'll give the end story here just to say that Dad is back in our lives. He's been in our lives for the last several years, and we've healed a lot of those wounds. But I get the pain. I finally understand the pain that people often feel to a small degree. Any thoughts?
Yeah, that this idea of like the perfect family and then it being shattered so later in life can really like change your worldview of like, oh wow, things, you start questioning things. Not to say that the
It's
past
true.
wasn't perfect. I'm sure it sounds like you had a lovely upbringing, but you're suddenly like, oh, things aren't just perfect, there are flaws. And in a way that is emotional maturity and growth, because there's always a shadow of everything. And that if things are only one way, you're missing what's underneath, you're missing the rest of the iceberg, right? So it's actually probably a really good thing that happened, because it made you more realistic about the world.
Totally agree. Totally. Anyway, no, that's awesome. All right, talk about loneliness. You say here, quote, there's nothing lonelier than being in a relationship where you're not connected to someone, where you have to hide parts of yourself or fight for attention. Let me keep it real, right? We're being real. I've got a few married friends that feel like they're in that place.
Yeah, I've made a video about Gottman's like, you know, 3 things that determine whether a relationship breaks up or whether it continues for the long term. And the main thing is bids for attention. So if you say, oh, look at that tree, and your partner says, oh yeah, that's a pretty tree, that is considered like a positive response to a bid. If you say, look at that tree, and they say nothing, that's like neutral. And if you say, look at that tree, and they say, oh, that tree is really ugly, or shut up, why are you distracting me? That's a negative bid. And couples who had more negative bids or more neutral bids were more likely to divorce later on. And I think it's that feeling of like not being attended to by your partner, of you're trying to connect and they're saying no, that just feels so desperately isolating and can make you feel lonelier than if you were single, right?
Oh, yeah. And you talk in the book about, I hope I articulate, so fix my articulation if you wouldn't mind. But when I was reading your book, you talked about how sometimes when we're married for a long time, or we're in a relationship for a long time, it almost becomes so familiar, like family, and that you lose the romantic side because you're not really romantic with family members, kind of a thing. So maybe you can clarify what I was trying to describe there.
Yeah, well, I think the more you build a life and build a family, you do become family, but you're also not related. And it's really important to not feel like, you know, you're your partner's mother or father, and you're not in a caring role, or you're not a child who's helpless, that you have to stay related on like an adult to adult level to keep the desire and the attraction. But you also have to not be so disconnected that you are feeling that loneliness and feeling that you're, you know, 2 strangers living in a house. So I think relationships are about balancing the need for closeness and the need for separation. And if you go too close, you start to feel like family, and you might not want to sleep with each other anymore, or you might not feel romantically connected. And if you're too separate, then you're lonely, and no one wants to feel lonely in a relationship. So yeah, I think you have to kind of continuously reevaluate where you are on that spectrum and make sure that you create space and also closeness.
I would remind everybody listening to this or watching this to get the book, Your Pocket Therapist by Dr. Annie Zimmerman, because in this section where you talk about this is in the second half of the book, you actually share throughout the whole book, you share all kinds of exercises. Love that. But you share stories in there of how you teach a principle, and then you share an actual story of someone that went through this and how it might relate to someone else. So you give in the book, you give on loneliness, you said tips for feeling less lonely. Number one, try to connect to whatever you're hiding. Okay. And okay, let's just go through these real quick. Try to connect. And if you'll just make a comment, try to connect to whatever you're hiding. Any thoughts there?
That I think loneliness starts with connection to yourself. And if you're disconnected from yourself, how can you connect to other people? So the first step towards becoming less lonely is to really know yourself and all the bits of yourself that you're repressing.
Love it. Number two, take off your mask. We kind of talked about this earlier. You say, tell people how you really feel. Any additional thoughts there?
Yeah, I was thinking when I was writing this about men specifically, I guess more middle-aged men even, who, you know, they meet up and they just have these superficial conversations and they never really know each other. They might connect over like sports or something, but really inside they've got all of this stuff going on or in their personal life and they never talk about it. And I think that can mean that your relationships don't feel true because they're not seeing how you really feel. And I think to feel connected to people, we need to let them into all of the other stuff too.
Okay, we're going to go back. I love that. We'll go back to that on one of your pocket notes. Number three, find a community of like-minded people. Seems very practical.
Yeah, just I think feeling like you belong to a group. I guess loneliness isn't just about connecting to individuals, but also to like wider society and feeling like you're part of something.
Yeah, totally. Number four, help someone. You say here, we all want to feel wanted. By giving others and experiencing their recognition and gratitude, we often feel more connected. So get out, what I'm hearing from that is get out of yourself a little bit and find ways to serve others and to give to others. And in return, karma, maybe, right? You're the benefactor of that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. Like feeling needed can make you feel really connected.
Yeah, totally. And then number five, try to be more present. Feeling less lonely is about first connecting to yourself, whether it's mindfulness, breath work, physical exercise, journaling, talking to yourself, dancing. Try anything that brings you into the present moment. Any additional thoughts there?
Yeah, I guess it made me think of this like phone addiction that so many of us have of scrolling, of like it's such a deadening experience that you're already dissociated that you're not really present, and that can make you feel disconnected from yourself and others. And I think the way to feel connected, which is the opposite of loneliness, is to like feel alive, is to do something that, you know, shakes you up and makes you alive and in the moment.
Love it. Okay, three questions or 3 points, 2 pockets. And you can get these for everyone listening or watching this. You can get these in the book. Love it. The first pocket is what actually is self-love. You say here, I'm not a huge fan of the phrase, love yourself. I find it patronizing and insincere. That being said, a lot of us do not love ourselves. Any additional thoughts there? I agree that we might put a happy face on, but a lot of people are not feeling that love for themselves.
Yeah, I don't know what you think about the phrase like love yourself. I think
I agree. No, let's pause right there. I agree with you. In fact, anybody listening to this could go to a YouTube video where I defied the word self-love. There's a video out there on it. And we didn't write it the same way, but I think the spirit of what you're saying and the spirit of this is why I loved reading your book, because it seems so practical. So I'm with you on this 100%.
Yeah, it reminds me of how people talk about like body positivity, that you love your body. And if you are struggling with your body, that seems miles away and unattainable. And there's a new phrase, which is like body neutrality, which is like, just feel neutral about your body. Like, don't judge it, feel neutral, rather than having to love yourself when it feels fake. And I think that's really important, because sometimes like saying these positive affirmations and like, oh, I love myself, it's just not coherent with how we really feel. Like if you have trauma, there will be a part of you that feels that you're bad or feels that you're wrong in some way or deserving of what happened. And we have to have space for that part of you, rather than just pouring in all this kind of positive language when it's not coherent with how you really feel.
Love it. It's important to have self-compassion, right? We want that.
Yeah.
We want to love ourselves. I think if you just focus on love by itself, it's a hard thing to materialize in an authentic way. But if you'll
Yeah,
serve, if you'll serve people, if you'll be more grateful for the little things and the big things in your life, I think the love automatically comes with it. Any thoughts?
yeah, definitely. I think compassion and love comes as you approach yourself with curiosity and process difficult feelings, but it's not where the healing lies, because it's like the tip of the iceberg. It's not the whole substance, you know?
And you say in the book at some point, well, maybe it's in here. Oh, here you go. You say it's in this pocket. You say, but this is only loving part of ourselves. The true self-love is loving the messy bits. It's loving your tendency to be a little bit selfish, the envy you feel for your best friend, the bitter or aggressive parts. Self-love is meaningless if you only love the good parts. For true self-love, you have to love the parts you are denying and projecting onto others. Can you love the parts of you that society and maybe your family told you make you unlovable? That's the real test, you say. Can you love really the vulnerable part of you? Can you love the part that sometimes hurts others? If you can, if you can start to own and even have compassion for these parts, then you're on the path to real love. Well said, Annie. That was awesome. All right. Next one, law of projection. Projection is one of the most important concepts I wish everyone understood. Okay, projection.
Projection is how we can come to understand ourselves in the way we talk about and experience other people, and that so many relationship problems are coming from projection. So you're experiencing someone as like, let's say, okay, oh, you're really angry with me, and actually you're the one who's angry, and you're projecting your anger onto them and experiencing the world as being angry with you. But actually, if you process your own anger and let yourself be the angry one, you suddenly can see that people aren't angry with you, or maybe they are, but they also really like you and they also love you, and it lets in the reality of how other people are rather than just the lens with which you're seeing them. And I think that by being aware that we can project our internal world onto other people, it means that we can change how we relate to other people, because instead of just blaming everything on somebody else, we can take responsibility for how we're feeling and what we might be putting onto them.
Does that relate to, I remember reading many years ago, Debbie Ford, who was on Oprah several years ago. She wrote a book called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. It was all about this concept of projecting. And she said most of the things, and I hope I'm articulating this right, but most of the things that we criticize in others is oftentimes something we are struggling with within ourselves.
Yeah, this is something that Jung said originally, I think. And then it can be really helpful to pay attention to the things that you complain about in other people. And if you do that with that curious kind of growthful mind, it actually teaches you like the irks that you have in other people are generally things that you're not accepting in yourself. And if you can start to accept that in yourself, then you can probably be more tolerant to other people. So if you're really intolerant to people, chances are you're extremely harsh on yourself. So that's a sign that you need to develop that real self-love where you bring in your shadow and accept the parts of yourself that you're ashamed of. And what happens is the more compassionate you are to yourself, suddenly the more tolerant you are to other people and their flaws.
Love it. Well said. Well said. Okay, last thought question I wrote at the top of my notes was your thought on this. Someone once said, it's a quote by someone else, any virtue taken to the extreme can become a vice.
Mm.
The idea is, when I was reading your book, it seemed like, hey, just trying to find some balance in the good, the bad, the ugly, trying to have some compassion. But when people do extreme things, that can become a vice. It can become a problem. Does that trigger any thoughts for you?
Yeah, it makes me think about addiction and how anything can become an addiction if we are depending on it to feel okay in ourselves. That you can get addicted to like skin picking. It's not just drugs and alcohol. It's, we can get addicted to work or exercise, even though these are considered like positive things. And I think to that quote of too much of anything, too much dependence on anything to feel okay becomes a vice, and therefore it becomes something we need to unpick.
Love it. Listen, you have a powerful book here with pocket-sized messages in there, but you wrap those around with stories and analogies and insights, and then, of course, exercises. I encourage, and I really mean this authentically, I encourage everyone to get a copy of your book, Your Pocket Therapist. Any last thoughts? Before we do last thoughts, Albie, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I didn't introduce. I noticed that Albie was up earlier, or
He's on the floor right here, so he can hear you.
Okay, Albie, thank you for being a part of the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast, So sorry I didn't introduce you. Anyway, just wanted to make sure I acknowledge Albie was part of the podcast in the beginning. All right, any last thoughts from you, Annie?
Just that it's been really nice to have this like very authentic conversation with you, and also that the book currently isn't out yet, and the idea that you've read it and are enjoying it and are digesting it is like so very exciting to me. So thank you so much for that. You bet.
It was truly my pleasure. By the way, where would people go to get a copy of the book? Because I think it comes out, if I remember correctly, January 9th. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. So they can go to Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, anywhere you get your books.
Okay, we'll put some little things up here on the video. So go to Amazon, go wherever you buy books. They'll be available everywhere. Thankful to your publisher for bringing you to our team. I'm grateful that you were on the call. I feel like we just touched the tip of the iceberg. There's much more we could talk about, but you did a great job. And I'm so thankful that you came onto the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Hey there, thanks for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. I want you to know that I am grateful that you are a part of my community, and I hope that you're getting a lot out of my various podcast episodes. You see, it is my goal to provide you with those slide edge principles, strategies, and inspiration that can help you achieve your goals and your dreams. My one request is, if you enjoy my podcast in general, or you have listened to an episode that you really liked, could you do me a favor? It would mean the world to me if you could write a simple review, or if you could simply give me a star rating. I would really appreciate it. Now go out there and unleash your greatness within.
GreatnessWithin.com